The late 15th century marked the beginning of a new era in European history, the Age of Exploration. Driven by a thirst for wealth, knowledge, and adventure, European explorers set sail across the vast oceans, eager to discover new lands and trade routes. Christopher Columbus, an Italian explorer funded by the Spanish crown, is a prominent figure of this era. His voyages, although mistaken in their destination, opened up the Americas to European exploration and conquest. Columbus's discovery of the Americas in 1492 had far-reaching consequences. It triggered a wave of European exploration and colonization, forever changing the course of history. Europeans, armed with advanced technology and a sense of superiority, embarked on a mission to claim new territories and exploit their resources. This marked the beginning of a complex and often brutal chapter in human history. The Age of Exploration wasn't just about discovering new lands, it was about expanding European power and influence. The explorers were followed by conquistadors, missionaries, and settlers, all eager to claim a piece of the newfound wealth and spread European culture and religion. This period laid the foundation for centuries of European colonialism, with its lasting impact still felt around the world today. Spain, flush with the success of Columbus's voyages, quickly established itself as a dominant force in the Americas. Driven by the 3 G's gold, glory, and God's Spanish conquistadors, often with brutal efficiency, conquered vast empires and subjugated indigenous populations. Hernán Cortés's conquest of the Aztec Empire in Mexico and Francisco Pizarro's overthrow of the Inca Empire in Peru stand as stark examples of this ruthless expansion. The Spanish conquistadors were driven by a lust for gold and silver. They plundered the treasures of the Aztec and Inca empires, shipping vast quantities of precious metals back to Europe. This influx of wealth fueled the Spanish economy and contributed to Spain's rise as a major European power. However, the quest for gold was not the only motivating factor for the Spanish. They were also driven by a desire for glory and a fervent belief in their religious superiority. They sought to convert indigenous populations to Christianity, often by force, and impose their own cultural norms and values on the conquered societies. While Spain focused on the Americas, Portugal, under the leadership of Prince Henry the Navigator, turned its attention eastward. Driven by a desire to find a sea route to the spice-rich East Indies, Portuguese explorers navigated the treacherous waters around Africa, establishing trading posts along the way. Vasco da Gama's successful voyage to India in 1498 opened up a lucrative trade route, bypassing the traditional land routes controlled by Arab and Ottoman traders. The Portuguese established a vast trading empire stretching from the coasts of Africa to the islands of Indonesia. They traded in spices, silk, porcelain, and other valuable commodities, amassing immense wealth and power. This trade not only enriched Portugal, but also had a profound impact on European cuisine, culture, and economics. However, Portugal's colonial ambitions were not without their dark side. They engaged in the slave trade, capturing and transporting Africans to work on their plantations in Brazil and other colonies. This marked the beginning of a horrific chapter in human history, as millions of Africans were forcibly removed from their homes and subjected to brutal conditions. Building on its naval prowess, Great Britain emerged as a major colonial power in the 17th and 18th centuries. The British East India Company, established in 1600, gradually gained control over large parts of India, exploiting its resources and people for profit. The British also established colonies in North America, the Caribbean, and Australia, creating a vast empire upon which the sun never set. The British Empire was built on a complex system of trade, exploitation, and governance. They established plantations in the Caribbean and American South, growing sugar, tobacco, and cotton, all fueled by the forced labor of enslaved Africans. The profits from these enterprises flowed back to Britain, enriching the nation and contributing to its industrial revolution. The British, like other colonial powers, justified their actions with a sense of cultural and racial superiority. They believed in their right to rule over inferior races and imposed their own laws, customs, and institutions on the colonized populations. Section 5. Other colonial powers, France and the Netherlands. While Spain, Portugal, and Britain emerged as the dominant colonial powers, other European nations were not far behind. France established colonies in North America, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia, while the Netherlands, through the Dutch East India Company, gained control over the spice trade in Indonesia. These colonial ventures, driven by similar economic and political ambitions, further expanded European influence and left a lasting impact on the world. France, under the rule of King Louis XIV, established a vast colonial empire, stretching from Canada to the Caribbean to India. They engaged in the fur trade in North America, established sugar plantations in the Caribbean, and competed with the British for control of India. The legacy of French colonialism can still be seen in the language, culture, and institutions of many former colonies. The Dutch, known for their seafaring prowess and commercial acumen, established a powerful trading empire through the Dutch East India Company. They gained control over the spice trade in Indonesia, establishing plantations and exploiting the island's resources. The Dutch East India Company, one of the first multinational corporations, became a model for future colonial ventures. Section 6. Exploitation and its consequences. The dark side of colonization. European colonialism was built on a foundation of exploitation. The quest for resources, wealth, and power drove Europeans to exploit the lands and peoples they encountered. This exploitation took many forms, from the seizure of land and resources to the forced labor and enslavement of indigenous populations. One of the most devastating consequences of European colonialism was the introduction of diseases to which indigenous populations had no immunity. Smallpox, measles, and influenza ravaged through the Americas, decimating indigenous populations and weakening their resistance to European conquest. This demographic catastrophe had a profound impact on the social, cultural, and political landscape of the Americas. Furthermore, European colonialism led to the destruction of traditional ways of life, as indigenous cultures and institutions were suppressed or destroyed. European languages, religions, and customs were imposed on colonized populations, often through force or coercion. Section 7. The Transatlantic Slave Trade, a stain on history. The transatlantic slave trade, a horrific chapter in human history, was an integral part of European colonialism. Millions of Africans were forcibly removed from their homes, transported across the Atlantic in appalling conditions, and sold into slavery to work on plantations in the Americas. This brutal system of forced labor fueled the economies of European colonial powers and enriched their elites. The transatlantic slave trade had a devastating impact on Africa. It led to the depopulation of entire regions, fueled wars and instability, and created a legacy of trauma and exploitation that continues to affect the continent today. The enslaved Africans, subjected to unimaginable cruelty and hardship, showed remarkable resilience and resistance, preserving their cultures and contributing to the development of the Americas. The abolition of the slave trade in the 19th century, a result of the tireless efforts of abolitionists and enslaved people themselves, marked an important step towards a more just and equitable world. However, the legacy of slavery and its enduring impact on race relations, economic inequality, and social justice continues to resonate today. Section 8. The Legacy of Colonialism, a World Transformed. The impact of European colonialism continues to shape the world today. The political boundaries of many countries, drawn arbitrarily by colonial powers, often disregarded historical and cultural realities, leading to conflict and instability. The economic disparities between former colonial powers and their former colonies persist, with many developing countries struggling to overcome the legacies of exploitation and underdevelopment. Moreover, the cultural legacy of colonialism is deeply ingrained in many societies. European languages, religions, and customs continue to hold sway in many former colonies, often at the expense of indigenous cultures and traditions. Section 9. Conclusion. Understanding the past, shaping the future. European colonialism was a complex and often brutal period in human history. Driven by a thirst for wealth, power, and influence, European powers reshaped the world in their own image, leaving a lasting impact on the political, economic, and cultural landscape of the globe. Understanding the legacies of colonialism is essential for addressing contemporary global inequalities and fostering a more just and equitable world. By learning from the mistakes of the past, we can work towards a future where all people have the opportunity to thrive, free from the shackles of exploitation and oppression. The journey towards a more equitable world requires acknowledging the injustices of the past, understanding their enduring consequences, and working together to create a future where all people have the opportunity to reach their full potential.